taxpayers are still paying tenants rent from COVID. This blew my mind when I read this article, and I was like, there's absolutely no way this can still be going on, right? COVID was what, 3 years ago now? But there's still people on a program and they're getting their rent paid by the taxpayer. My name's Grant Warrington. I'm a real estate investor in Florida who's an expert on my own opinion. And I bring you all the videos you need to watch and a few you don't. Now let's jump in. I'm from Michigan and my wife and I recently moved down to Florida. So when I read this article from the Michigan Advance, I was really shocked. I didn't know that taxpayers were still paying tenants rent from COVID. Let me jump in here and we'll pull the article up on the side so you can follow along with me. COVID area funding that's prevented thousands of evictions is set to expire. What happens next? What happens next is they get evicted. The tenants have the obligation to pay their rent, but they also have the right to live in a place that's safe for their kids. Of course, I love how they snuck the last part in there, right? We'll put the kids in there and we'll make this a little easier for people to agree on. Pandemic relief money that has prevented thousands of Michiganders from being evicted will run out at year's end, with legal advocates concerned that tenants will once again find themselves on the short end of the lease. Now again, COVID was 3 years ago, so in 2024 to be talking about this really blows my mind. Anytime you put people on a program, and they did that, I understand why they did it back when COVID started, because we had no idea what was going on. Governor Whitmer shut down the state and no one could work for 3 months. So they created these programs. It took a long time to get them started and get them going. They actually gave the money to the tenants instead of giving them to the landlord. Probably not a great idea, but they did do this, and people did need that because they couldn't go to work. Here's the problem, okay? When you get people on these programs, it's very hard to get them off. The other thing that happens is you bloat government. This creates jobs in the government. And guess what? Those people in the government don't want to give those jobs up. They want this to continue. So let's keep going here. Since July 2020, legal aid programs in Michigan have received additional funding as part of the statewide eviction diversion program funded through the COVID Emergency Rental Assistance Program. The funding significantly increased legal aid's ability to provide representation to tenants facing evictions and currently funds 107 full-time staff. That's a lot of people. However, I'll call it Sarah. Sarah funds for eviction prevention will lapse at the end of 2024. And they should. I still can't believe that we're even having this discussion and I'm reading this article. So that has created an inflection point for advocates who say that despite millions of dollars already spent to alleviate the issue, the full depth of the problem makes it imperative that a stable funding source be created to make sure renters are able to utilize all their legal rights. A stable funding source. You know what that means? That means your taxes are going to go up because we're going to create another program that you're going to pay for. Otherwise, increasing rates of eviction could result in negative health outcomes that help perpetuate a cycle of poverty. Meanwhile, lawmakers hope a package of bills will address more than just the financial aspect of the problem, but the systemic deficits as well. I think this was a great idea when they created this program. It did help a lot of people. There was a lot of chaos. Nobody knew what to do. But to be looking at this 3 years later and thinking we need to continue this, that again is the problem. If these people are not paying rent, that's a problem. They need to start working, or they should have been off this system years ago. I think a lot of other states have ended these programs. Now Michigan is looking to prolong it with no end in sight either. It doesn't say they want to refund this program and stop it in year 2028. They're saying we need more funds so we can keep this going forever. Ann Rout is the executive director of the Michigan Advocacy Program, MAP, in Ypsilanti, one of the regional legal services programs that receives the funding from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MISHDA, which is then administered by the Michigan State Bar Foundation in the form of grants. So here's what she says. Losing 107 advocates statewide could hardly come at a worse time, Rout told the Michigan Advance. housing costs continue to increase, making safe and affordable housing out of the reach for many people. Rout said that when a tenant is facing a non-payment case, they get a notice about how much rent they owe, it's true, with as little as 7 days to pay in certain cases and up to 30 days if they are in subsidized or federally related properties. If they don't pay in that time, then the landlord files a lawsuit against them, and if the landlord wins a judgment, the tenant can be evicted 10 days after that. Now, that is absurd. We've had to go through this process before, and yes, we've given people a 7-day notice. They have 7 days to make it right. But again, if they don't pay, then we have to file an eviction against them. That takes time, and it could take 3 months in Michigan to get somebody out of your property. Now, you have to also keep in mind, and this is what bothers me as a landlord, they don't talk about any of the landlords that own these properties, right? So these people aren't paying rent, and we're trying to get them out of the housing or get them to move on, right? And then sometimes landlords pay tenants to get them to leave. So we're still paying things like mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and we're also taking care of the property. Now, in this case, I'm hoping the landlords are getting paid in this program, but it's not saying that. I know the tenants are receiving the money, but hopefully they're paying it through to the landlord. She said what is not clear to many tenants is that they have counterclaims. They can raise those as an affirmative defense and potentially prevent an eviction. So what they're doing here is they're teaching people how to prolong evictions. Great news, right? We're not helping them to find jobs or anything like that. We're teaching them, let's show you how to remain in the system longer. And by the way, we're gonna get paid and we're gonna help you try and stay in a place where you're not paying rent. Brilliant idea. Out of those 107 employees, couldn't we have taken some of these people that are unemployed and that are in this system? Couldn't we have hired them? Wouldn't that have been a better idea, putting them to work? Instead of whoever these 107 people are that are facing losing their jobs. And they should, because this program needs to go. Rout said in order to maintain what she said has been a very successful program beyond 2024, the Michigan State Bar Foundation would need $8 million annually. Although it's estimated that it would take $12 million to fully address the problem statewide. So she's saying, we just need 8, but we really need 12. So we'll come back to you in a few years. We're gonna ask for that full 12, but just give us the 8 for now. While current resources do not allow legal aid programs to fully represent all tenants facing eviction, advice and counsel is often provided to help litigants understand the court process and represent themselves. In 2023, that amounted to 26,251 cases that were handled by legal aid programs, including everything from advice to full representation. My question too is, are they offering any kind of legal aid to landlords? Because listen, when COVID hit, my wife and I were scared to death because if our tenants didn't pay us rent, we had mortgages, again, taxes, insurance, we had to take care of the properties. That would have crushed us. We would have had to declare bankruptcy. We would have lost everything that we had worked for to build up. And I know some people might say, oh, well, that's terrible. Rent needs to be lower. People shouldn't have to pay rent. Well, listen, this channel is not for you, okay? Because people should have to pay rent and I should have to provide them a nice place to live. That's the way it should be. And we expect rent payments in return. MAP said that from 2019 to 2020, the number of tenants who received full representation increased by 385% to 7,909, which was only made possible with the COVID rental assistance funding. However, even though that emergency funding is ending, the number of tenants in need remains at pandemic era levels, with 7,862 individuals receiving full representation in 2023. Of course, no one has left the program because you keep offering it to them. If you would have phased this out years ago or let them know now, hey, this program's ending, you're gonna have to figure something out because you're not gonna be able to ride this program out for life. People will stay in the program and they're not gonna get off it. I hate to break that to you, but apparently no one in the state of Michigan knows that. Representative Emily Devendorf, a Democrat from Lansing, says this: evictions increase the probability of applying to a homeless shelter by 14%. Yet nationally, only about 3% of tenants facing eviction have access to legal representation, she told the committee. This imbalance of power and self versus attorney representation in the courtroom often leads to unjust outcomes. A right to counsel mitigates the harm that can come from evictions. She also goes on to say that in New York City, the right to counsel has resulted in 84% of represented renters facing eviction remaining in their homes, while 93% are able to do the same in Cleveland. So that means they're helping people stay in these properties when they're not paying rent. That's just wrong in my opinion, because there's nobody out there holding people accountable. If you don't pay rent, you're gonna have to face the consequences. Now, I'm not talking about when in COVID, when things were uncertain, when you weren't allowed to work. This program made sense back then. But now, 3 years later, when you still have these people in this program who are not gonna leave, this doesn't make any sense. These landlords are still battling through this, and it's really a shame they have to do this. She goes on to say, by providing legal representation to those who cannot afford it, we can ensure that all parties in an eviction proceeding have a fair chance to represent their case. This not only benefits the individuals, but also contributes to the overall integrity of our judicial system, she says. She also said that providing tenants with basic legal representation should not be seen as hampering landlords, especially the mom and pop operations that rent out just a few units for passive income. Then she says, good landlords aren't impacted by this legislation. They just aren't. How does she know that, right? I mean, that's a pretty broad statement because I'm a good landlord and I would be considered a small landlord, and this would dramatically impact me. And if she's gonna say that, I can go on to say that all the people in this program are bad tenants, right? There's a blanket statement. She also went on to say that when they asked MSHDA what the top line cost would be to meet the full needs of Michiganders, the number was $40 million. In 2022, Detroit City Council voted to provide lower income residents with free legal representation when facing eviction, one of 16 cities nationwide to do so. Initially funded with more than $20 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, those funds are only available until mid-2026. Detroit Corporation Counsel Conrad Malott told the Detroit Free Press it would likely cost the city between $15 million and $18 million a year to fund that program on its own. Now in Detroit, when we went through COVID, there was stories of people coming in, landlords taking tenants to court years later after COVID, and the judges saying, we're not gonna try this case now, come back in 6 months. It was a disaster for landlords and it was a very scary situation. So back to Rout here. She says that it's important for both lawmakers and the public to keep in mind that the vast majority of these cases are not simply about tenants who don't wanna pay rent, but instead about disputes over issues like health and safety and whether the landlord is keeping up their obligations under the lease. Okay, let's see. Now we're kind of changing directions here, it looks like. It was COVID relief, and now we're gonna make this about health and safety. But let's see what she has to say. People can withhold rent if they have significant repair problems. That's true. If you have a lip in your carpet, that's not something you can withhold for. But if you have a significant repair issue and it affects the value of the apartment or your ability to use your bathroom, you can't use your sink, water's leaking everywhere, sewage is coming up, these kinds of problems you can withhold rent for, and advising people on how to do it, that is a useful tool. Now, I agree here. If that's the case and the tenant is coming through with those issues, that is something they can do. Now they have to put that rent into a bank account or something like that. A tenant could Google that or watch a YouTube video on how to do that. If you're a shitty landlord, shame on you. You need to be held accountable for that. But if you're a shitty tenant and you don't want to pay rent, shame on you. You need to be held accountable for that. It's all about accountability on both ends, in my mind. The landlord has an obligation to provide a safe, habitable apartment. I agree, right? It's got to be working. Everything's got to be functioning. It should be clean when they move in there. And the tenant has the obligation to pay their rent. I love it. So this makes sense, right? I do this, you do that. It's fair, and that's how it works. But then they slide this in here. But they also have the right to live in a place that's safe for their kids. Okay, of course they do. But I love how they slide that in there and say, they're turning this into, this was for COVID relief. Now we're turning this program into all these people aren't paying rent because it's an unsafe place to live. I think there's a lot more to this story, and shame on them for trying to kick this can, this taxpayer dollar, down the road, and they're trying to, again, just bloat government. I'm sure they want to hire more people, put more people on the payroll, and guess who's gonna pay for that? Taxpayers. They need to look at this system and say, what's a good way we can get out of this, right? Because again, it's been 3 years. How much longer is this gonna go on for? Things like this make me really happy. I made the move to Florida and got out of Michigan. If you feel the same way, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and like, and check out this next video. I think you're really gonna love it. So I'll see you in this video.